Hi, my name is James, and I'm going to be speaking with Jim from Elion International regarding the spreadsheet to database solution that they have. First question for you, Jim, is what problem does spreadsheet to database solve, and how would you explain it to a company running workflows through Excel?
This is an age-old problem, and I've seen this all sorts of different companies of different sizes. This is particularly an issue for mid-sized businesses, though. And so this problem has been around ever since spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are really, really convenient because you open them up and you can type stuff into them. The problem is before too long, they get bigger and bigger, and everybody needs to access these things because they become part of a workflow. And so, Bob has to hand it off to Mary, who has to hand it off to Tanya, and nobody can work at this stuff on this stuff at the same time. You also wind up, because just of the format, you're dealing with kind of two-dimensional information, it's hard to capture relationships a lot. And then if your workflow has different spreadsheets because you may have different departments involved, you have this preponderance of spreadsheets. I was working with a manufacturing company recently, and their procurement process had like 7 different spreadsheets. And they're copying and pasting from one spreadsheet to another and doing data exports. And so the chance to make mistakes is really huge, and they're not necessarily secure either. So there's a problem on all those levels, but it really slows down your process, and it's incredibly manual, and it doesn't tee up your data in a structured way to do things in the future like automation and AI.
Following that up, what are the biggest risks of using spreadsheets as operational systems?
Yeah, you're just limited. They don't scale. That's one of the biggest things. That's why I say it's a particular problem for mid-sized companies because their business is expanding, but now their growth is inhibited by their internal processes, their back office processes, because they're so manual. And it's really interesting because you can get these mid-sized organizations that may have an ERP system, they may have CRM, but if you look at their workflows, there are still spreadsheets in between those systems. And so it's hard to do systems integration. So being able to get that valuable company data out of spreadsheets and into a more structured format allows a whole bunch of positive things to happen, not to mention systems integration as your company grows. But the biggest inhibitor by far is the scalability because your labor costs go up, or that spreadsheet-based workflow just breaks under the pressure, and it affects the quality of your deliverables, the timing, everything else.
What issues are companies facing most? Duplicate versions, manual entry, broken formulas, lack of permissions, poor reporting, or data errors?
Yes, all of those things. The manual entry is brutal because when you have to do that, if you don't have good data validation with spreadsheets, really don't have that built in, people can miskey something. And the more data you have going into a spreadsheet, the more opportunities for the data to be miskeyed. If someone's formula is wrong or not updated, it can cascade. And the multi-user thing is huge. You're limited to one person at a time working on this thing. Now, there are things you can do with like Google Sheets has something where you can get multiple people working on something at the same time, but you can see the potential risk in doing that. So the lack of multi-user capability is a big problem, and the security of this. You have different people in different roles, again, especially as a company grows. You don't necessarily want everybody in that workflow to have access to every part of the data. So the security thing is a big thing because as your organization grows and those workflows expand and you have more and more people involved, you may not want everyone in the workflow to have access to all that data. There's only certain data that, each type of role should have access to because it may be sensitive. And that's where you wind up with multiple spreadsheets, and then someone somewhere has to glue all that together. And so it's a weird little security structure that's actually implemented by multiplying the spreadsheets. So there's any number of problems with that.
What types of spreadsheets have the highest ROI potential for this service?
I mean, really anything where you're working with spreadsheets, it should be part of a workflow though. I mean, if someone's got their own little spreadsheet and they're doing their own little thing, okay, that's fine. But it's when spreadsheets are the key data mover in a workflow, I can absolutely promise you there's a more efficient, secure, and less labor intensive way to address that.
Gotcha. What does it mean to turn a spreadsheet into a database application?
Yeah, this is terrific because we have a really neat way to take a spreadsheet and not only put it into a database, but have a nice front end on it. We're not talking about some massive development effort. And so I think people have known for a long time that they need to get their data into a centralized system for all the reasons we just mentioned and have a nice UI on it so that people can go in. You can have multiple people at a time accessing the data, but the barrier has been price. It is in the past been extremely expensive and it takes a long time to do. You hear about these 6, 9, 12-month projects and all these other little things. We have a really, really neat way to move a spreadsheet into a database, multi-user, secure, with a web front end, not in months, but weeks, and most of that work isn't technical. It's capturing business rules and things like that. So this is something that can be turned around extremely rapidly and at a very low price point, and then it can be added to after that. So that is a huge difference between the old methods of building enterprise data systems and the approach that we take.
What does the customer get at the end of the project?
They get this multi-user secure database system, web front end that can be expanded. You may want to add more workflows to that. This can be expanded as much as you need it to be. They get the systems integration because now your data is in a database. And if you have an ERP system, a CRM, any sort of other system like that, they connect through databases. And now you have beautifully structured data that's relational, it's secured, you can use it for systems integration. Your reporting capability now is much broader, and you can pick your own third-party reporting tools. All of them connect to databases. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility and capability that an organization gets just by moving these things into a database.
Gotcha. How does the user experience change and maybe what changes after the spreadsheet becomes a database with that front end that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's like using other apps that you may be used to, like if you have a SaaS system, if you have, a project management or planning tool or your ERP, it's a very familiar interface. But again, without the cost and without the subscription cost. And so I'm glad you kind of brought this up because a lot of people do have hosted systems that they're very familiar with, and those are web front ends on a back end database. So it's the very same thing. The problem that you see more and more now is the SaaS subscription costs. So those keep going up. And if you're a CFO or a CIO, you know full well what's happening to your SaaS costs. The subscriptions keep going up, and the software, that SaaS software, is more and more bloated. I've talked to people very recently who have big CRM systems, and they're like, you know what? We only use 20% of it. But you have to bring in experts that know these SaaS systems to get out of them what you want because the business model for the SaaS providers is more and more features so you can attract different kinds of customers. For your organization, you just care about the stuff that your people need to deal with, your workflows, your customers, your business. The beauty with all this is you can run this database system on premise, no subscription costs. We don't charge a subscription cost. There's no SaaS provider. You have it internally. It is yours. So that cost right away goes away, but you get the same user interaction, nice web front end, nice database back end. So it's very, very familiar to people. And it's a huge cost savings and not having to so we've all had this happen. We have our SaaS system that we use, and they come out with an updated version, and all of a sudden, the stuff I used to know how to do, I don't know how to do. They moved this and they added this and they put my thing under a different menu, and there's this constant relearning that has to happen. And it's fine if your systems need to update, but you should decide when those changes happen, not your SaaS provider, because that's disruptive to your workers. And so all of that is alleviated by having these very familiar systems under your control on your premises, targeted specifically at your workflows and needs.
Excellent. What improvements should potential clients expect? Data control improvements, form field improvements or forms, permissions, validation, reporting, audit trails.
Yeah, there's a couple here that are really important. So we talked about the multi-user. That's really important. Security, again, you may have certain people that should only access certain kinds of data. The systems we put together have user-based security and role-based security. So everyone has a login, you can assign them to different roles, and you can assign those roles to different capabilities and different data. So that is secure. The other big thing is the validation. So we talked about, entry errors into spreadsheets. The nice thing about these database systems is that you have data validation. So when someone is typing something in on a web page, you can validate that it's the correct data. You can also implement business rules. If this data equals this, I need this other thing to happen. This value should be this other thing should be calculated. I need to have, an email sent over here. All of those things have to be done manually and enforced manually with spreadsheets. So you have not institutionalized your business rules with the spreadsheets. You're just hoping that all of your people remember all of the rules. But we can institutionalize that into these systems. That is a huge part that people don't think about. And when you get into regulated environments, enforcing some of these business rules is even more important.
Why is this a simpler first step than a large custom software project for small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, that's the neat thing about this. You can start with a single spreadsheet. And because of the quick turnaround time, because of the low cost, you can have this system up and running in your environment, like I said, within weeks. So you don't have to have these big migration projects. Again, I worked with another company recently. They were implementing off-the-shelf SaaS ERP system to help them with different parts of their business. And the implementation was way over budget. It was way late. They had to retrain everybody on everything. It's one of these big bang solutions. And you're rolling the dice when you do that. You're gambling that not only investment in the system is going to pay off, but all the time you're investing bringing this thing on board is going to pay off. If you can do these little quick hits, have easy successes, and do this one spreadsheet at a time, you don't have this big bang cost, you don't have the big bang interruption, and you can start building these successes, and your people will be very confident about these changes that are happening because it's making their jobs easier. And that's the goal for your employees. It saves you money and helps you be more productive, but it's also going to save them a lot of effort. And because of our incremental approach, and the cost associated with this, the lower cost, you can do this in a strategic, incremental way.
So in other words, Elion International's spreadsheet to database solution, going with that versus a larger software project is going to be lower friction, lower risk, lower cost, and overall would titration to get into automating a lot of these, spreadsheet-based workflows instead of adopting a larger company-wide expensive initiative.
Yeah, and you know what? You just touched on something really important. And this goes back to just some strategic planning. if you are going to go with a SaaS system and you want to do automation or AI and you want to integrate your maybe AI processes, your agent workflows with your SaaS provider, they are already starting to charge a lot for tokens because you have to think about what's been going on in the SaaS world. As companies recently have been laying people off, that means the number of seat licenses for these SaaS companies has been reduced. And as more and more agents are interacting with these SaaS systems, these SaaS providers are now starting to charge tokens for that. There's a bit ServiceNow is a big company that, they're in the token business now because they're integrating so much agentic AI into their systems for interfaces with companies. And you really need to think about this strategically because if you're going to build workflows that integrate with a SaaS provider and you're depending on their tokens, they can raise that token price anytime they want to. And the cost for you to extract yourself from that is going to be prohibitive. So you really need to think about strategically where you want your data to live. And with this, it used to be with SaaS, you get your seat licenses, which were already going up, but they were kind of predictable until they raised the price. But tokens, when they start metering this stuff, that is a whole new level of uncertainty and cost. And you really need to factor that in and think about these custom, preferably on-premise or private cloud, still your own environment, solutions to safeguard against that potential very gigantic risk.
Why is structured database information a better foundation for automation and AI?
Yeah, it's interesting because AI works great with structured data. So AI is only as smart as the information you give it. And it really likes structure. And that's what databases do. Databases are excellent at structuring data. All the documents that people have, these documents were written for human consumption, not AI consumption. So they're fine to read, but they're not very structured. Spreadsheets are more structured, but even with spreadsheets, the validation isn't there and the business rules are still in people's heads a lot of time. So getting information like this into a database allows you now to integrate with AI or fine tune your own models or use RAG to have models talk to your database to get much more accurate information. People have probably heard about hallucinations. The hallucination rates on unstructured data is extreme, but you can really minimize that by having structured data. So AI is never going to be perfect, just like people aren't perfect. That's why you need humans in the loop to validate things along the way. But you can remove a very big risk area by training and fine tuning your AI models on structured data versus unstructured data.
Awesome. What workflow automation becomes possible after a spreadsheet is converted?
There are a lot of traditional automation tools that exist right now. And so even aside from AI, so again, they run best on databases. So you can apply a lot of existing technologies to these databases. You can write your own, if you have an internal IT staff, they can write things with your own internal tools that talk to the database and automate part of these processes. That is much harder to do with spreadsheets that you don't know when they were last updated or who had them last or if you have incomplete data. So that's one thing. When you get to AI and you're talking about AI agents, this is where you can really turbocharge that automation and leverage your AI investment because you're going to want to use AI for workflows. That's where the highest return on investment is. In order to minimize hallucination rates, you want each agent in the workflow to be dealing with the most accurate data possible. and that's going to come out of a database. And so the human in the loop stage, the quality control stage that checks the agent's work, that human is going to have fewer things to correct if the data that the agent was working on is more accurate. The error rate is just going to be so much lower. The humans are going to need to do less work. And so that is an extreme benefit from having this structured data as part of your AI investment as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for your time and giving us a good idea as to what Helions doing with the spreadsheet to database solution.
Thank you.